You know, when Andy was about that age, we had some woods on the other side of our house, and he loved to go out there and take me with him. He had found a low-lying area where water stood, and there were a lot of frogs and lizards and turtles and such in that area, and mosquitoes. But he liked to go over there, and the underbrush was so thick that if you worked your way there and back, your clothes were usually torn and you were bleeding by the time you got back. Of course, that didn't matter to him. He just had the greatest time. In fact, we had to take a machete sometimes and hack our way inch at a time through those woods to get to that place where the water was. And I thought about that this week as I considered where we're at in the book of Matthew. It just seems like to me that we are hacking through some thick theological underbrush at this point in Jesus' life. But there is a goal and a purpose, and God always has a victory in mind. And this morning, we're still in the midst of that thick theological underbrush, if I can call it that. But let's open our Bibles, open our hearts, get your bulletin out, turn it over, take a few notes, and see what the Lord will say to us from these few verses that we're going to read together this morning. In Matthew chapter 26 and verse 30, it says that after they sang, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Short little verse, it's a transition verse. They, here is Jesus and his 11 disciples. He's lost one, Judas. Judas, at this moment, is going to fulfill his commitment to Jesus' enemies. He has agreed to betray Jesus. And that hour is rapidly coming. So Jesus is left with his 11 disciples. They have just finished celebrating the Passover in the upper room. There were many surprises in that Passover. One of them was that Jesus got up from the table and wrapped a towel around him and washed his disciples' feet. Another one was that he instituted the Lord's Supper. Nobody had ever heard that before, seen that before. He changed the Passover, something that had been celebrated the same way for more than 1,000 years, and yet he instituted a new understanding which was focused on him and his suffering that he was about to take. The bread is his body, the cup is his blood that is poured out. And he also told his disciples that night that one of them would betray him. He didn't call Judas out individually, but he let them know that one of them would betray him. And so it was a night full of surprises. And they're on the move now. They're on the way to Gethsemane, where more surprises wait them. And in the conversation that ensues that we look at this morning, there's even another surprise that is there for them on this evening. Look at what Jesus says in verse 31. Jesus said to them, all of you, speaking of his disciples, all of you will fall away on account of me this night. For it stands written, I will strike the shepherds, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. After I am raised up, I will go ahead of you into Galilee. Now, typical of Jesus, with an economy of words, he is able to tell us a lot of things. And again, he says something here to the disciples which is stunning to them. As they walk through the city, probably quietly because everyone else is in their houses celebrating the Passover with their families, they go through the dark streets of the city on their way to Gethsemane, perhaps around 11 o'clock in the evening. And Jesus tells them that on that very night that they will all fall away on account of him. He uses the word, Matthew, to report this to us, uses the word scandalizo. They will all be, scandalizo means that they will be tripped up and they will fall. You can hear our English word scandal in that Greek term, scandalizo. And what is about to happen in many ways will be a scandal. But they will be tripped up and they will fall away. Now, he's not talking about physically, obviously. He's talking about a spiritual falling away. And notice what he says. They will fall away on account of him, on account of Jesus. What is it about Jesus that will cause them to fall away just hours later on this night? Well, it's the thing that Jesus has been talking about now for weeks and months. He is about to enter into what we call now his passion, his suffering. Things are about to get very crazy for the disciples. He's tried to prepare them, but it's kind of like losing a loved one. You can know that it's going to happen. You can think that you're prepared for it, but you never really are. When it happens, that's when you find out how you're going to respond to it. Many things in life are that way. And so they are about to find out, and Jesus is warning them ahead of time. He's saying it's not going to be good. What I'm about to experience is going to be a real struggle for you. Jesus' chosen pathway, his mission, which took him to the cross before the resurrection, was something that caused even his closest disciples, who had seen his miracles, who had heard his teaching, who had spent time with him personally, who knew him better than anyone else in this world, even they, would be insulted, would be offended, would be pushed away, would stumble and fall as a result of what was about to happen. Now notice what Jesus does here. He quotes from the Old Testament prophet Zechariah, and you could look that up and read it. There's an interesting change that Jesus makes here that I want to talk about more tonight, because we'll have more time for me to answer your questions and slow down. I don't want to slow down and do that today. I want to keep the pace up. So let's just look at how Jesus quotes Zechariah, and you go off this afternoon and look up Zechariah and think about that, and we'll talk some more about it this evening. Look what Jesus says, I will strike the shepherd. Who is speaking here? It's God. God is saying he will strike the shepherd. Who is the shepherd? The shepherd is Jesus. Jesus is the good shepherd, which he told his disciples earlier in the book of John, I am the good shepherd. I lay down my life for the sheep. He also went on to say that I lay it down voluntarily and I pick it up. I have authority to pick it up again, take it up again, speaking of his resurrection. And so Jesus is saying here, church, and let's not miss this, he is about to be struck down. And Judas will play his role in that, and he will pay a price for it. And the religious leaders will play their role in it, and they too will pay a price for their choice to reject Jesus. Pilate will try to wiggle out of making a decision, but he can't. He's put on the spot. That's what leadership is about, and he turns out to be a weak leader. And he'll pay the price for that. But ultimately, it is God himself who is striking down the shepherd. And Jesus is making that clear here. God says, I will strike down the shepherd. If God didn't choose for the shepherd to be struck down, then the shepherd would not be struck down. God has the power to protect Jesus from what is about to happen. And he will remove his protection from Jesus and allow him to go to the cross for our sakes, willingly, voluntarily. But the misunderstanding of the disciples about God and who he is and how he operates will cause them to be so offended by what happens to Jesus that they will fall away because they don't understand how God works, even though God has been telling them for weeks and months, this is what's going to happen. So Jesus warns them again to try to prepare them for what is about to happen. But notice in verse 32, he gives them a word of encouragement here. I don't know if they caught it. Later they would remember it. And anytime God comes to us, church, listen carefully, and says, this is going to be a time of sifting for you. This is going to be a time of struggle for you. This is going to be a time of testing for you. The word always comes, no matter how you react. And I love this. I will be there for you at the end. And I will lift you up. But don't miss this, church. I am not going to keep you from going through the sifting. It's going to happen. Then I'll be there for you at the end. I will follow Jesus saying, I will be struck down. Don't miss this in verse 30 and 31. I'm going to be struck down, but I'm going to be lifted up. And you're my followers. You are going to be scattered, but then you will be gathered. Now, if you're like me, we would love to put in a petition to the Lord and say, look, we love this lifting up part. We love this gathering part. Can't we do all of that without the striking down and the scattering? And I'll give you a little secret. I've been talking to the Lord about this for decades now, and he has refused to change his mind. And I still don't like it to this very day. I would like to reach a point in my personal walk with the Lord where he would finally say, Richard, you've made it. You've made it. You don't have to be tested anymore. And I can dream and hope that may happen sometime in this life, but I'm beginning to realize as I age that it's not going to. That no matter how long I walk the face of this earth, God is going to continue to test me. And yes, brother or sister, as long as you walk the face of this earth, God will continue to test you. But let me tell you, he does so out of love, and he does so to build you up, not to tear you down. And that's exactly what is happening here. Now, Peter is not ready for this. Look how he responds in verse 33. Peter replied and said, if all fall away, I will never fall away. If all fall away on account of you, I will never fall away. Now, the way that that's written, and so we have to believe the way that he said it, is the I will never fall away is emphatic. It's put in a particular position and done in a grammatical way that all the emphasis falls on the I. Peter is beating his breast at this point and talking about how wonderful he is. Now, stop and think about this. If all fall away, who's all? The men standing right there around him listening to him. The all includes his brother, Andrew. And so Peter is saying, you know what, Andrew? You might fall away. Sorry, bud. But I'm not going to. His best friends that he was in business with for however many years, James and John, Peter is looking at them and saying, you know, guys, you might fall away, but not me, because I've got this thing together. And all the others, Matthew and the others that were standing around there, Bartholomew and so forth, he's basically telling them, you know, Jesus might be right about you. I've also often wondered about you, but not me. It ain't going to happen. But look what Jesus says in verses 34. He looked at Peter and he said, I'll tell you the truth. This very night before a rooster crows, 3 times you will deny me. Now, Jesus is not doing a lot of really work to try to build him up here. You know, a lot of us would say, you know, Lord, you just gave us a pretty tough word there. Help us out. Yeah, I'm hurting. And Jesus says, if you're going to go down this road, you might as well go down it and do it all the way, and let's get it done so that you're ready to get on the other side and do what's right. And so, essentially, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, I hate to tell you this, but not only are you going to fall away, but you're going to be worse than those other guys that you just said you're better than. They're going to end up looking better than you before this night is over. Well, Peter is still unwilling to receive that word from the Lord, and so this all wraps up in verse 35. Look at verse 35. Peter, insulted, he replies and he says to the Lord, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. I will certainly not deny you. And the others said the same thing. Jesus let it go. He's not making any progress here. Things are just going to have to unfold and happen the way that they happen. He knew that. Jesus could see the future. He knew that these guys were going to have a tough night, tough few days, but then things would get better, and then they would move on. They would never forget the things that happened this night, and one of the reasons that they would never forget the things that happened this night is because of their own failure on this particular evening. Now, most of you know this story about Peter's denial. We'll get to it here not too long in this chapter. What Jesus said actually did come true, that Peter did deny the Lord. Now, in a way, Peter also was right too, because Peter said that he was willing to die for Jesus, and he was. And we're going to see before this chapter ends that when they come after Jesus, that Peter's the first one to pull his sword out and go rogue. You know, he's ready to spill his blood, because when he does that, the crowd that he's facing, there was no way he was going to win. He was fixing to go down. But Jesus stopped him. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But Peter is, he's not really lying to the Lord here. He is expressing what he really believes to be the truth. He's saying what he believes he will do, and in some ways he was right. But he didn't understand what was going on, and so he would be confused by how Jesus would respond to all of this. Peter is in essence telling Jesus, he's looking Jesus in the eye, and he's saying, Lord, you're wrong. Lord, you're wrong. Now, if we're going to be honest, if I'm going to be honest, I don't need to be honest for you. You can do that for yourselves. If I'm going to be honest, unfortunately, there are times in my life that I look at the Lord and just say, Lord, you're wrong. But I'm having to learn as time goes on that if I'm about to say, Lord, you're wrong, that I better stop and rethink. Because so far, the Lord hasn't been wrong. I have been many times, but he hasn't been. And so I'm learning, slowly but surely, that if my response is, Lord, you're wrong, then I need to stop and evaluate my situation. Peter wasn't ready for that. Peter was still doubting Jesus, not just about how he would respond, But the implication here in verse 35 is that really Peter is still doubting Jesus' resolve to go and die. Notice what he says, if it is necessary for me to die with you. The way that that's framed, it raises a question about whether Peter has really yet accepted the fact that Jesus really is going to die. Now, this gets a little subtle, so we don't want to go too far with it, but Peter is he's still got his own way of seeing how God works, and he's still got his own way of thinking about how things should work out. He's going to have to change his mind. Fortunately, he was willing to do so, and he became a powerful force for the gospel and in the kingdom after this. But first, God had to tear him down, break him down, and get him ready for his use. And that can be very uncomfortable. Some of you have been through that. I certainly have. It's not a comfortable thing to go through, but once you've been through it and you see that God knows what he's doing and that he is going to build you back up again and that you will be in a better place after you've walked through one of those valleys, it's easier to take. It's especially hard to take the first time or maybe the first few times. So what happened? I imagine this week people talking on late Friday or Saturday. You know, Jesus went to the cross on Friday morning. There was a big commotion in the city about that, and a lot of people probably went to find out what was going on, and others probably just heard the commotion and didn't make it over there. And I imagine these two people in Jerusalem talking about the events late Friday or maybe sometime Saturday on the Sabbath when they're resting and just hanging out, talking about the week. Hey, did you hear about that prophet from Nazareth? Oh, yeah, I've been hearing about him a lot. What about him? Well, they arrested him and crucified him. No. Are you kidding me? No. They did it yesterday morning. Oh, is that what that big commotion on the other side of the city was? I wondered what was going on. Yeah, that's what was happening. He was being tried publicly, and they crucified him. Oh, so I guess that big commotion was his disciples trying to fight back and save him. No, it wasn't. In fact, I hadn't thought about it until you just now mentioned it, but his disciples were nowhere to be found. When it came right down to it, Jesus stood alone. He stood alone, but he stood for those very disciples. And he stood for us. Now, Jesus is calling on us to adopt something that is not an easy, feel-good believism. There's a lot of big churches in the United States of America this morning filled with people who want somebody to make them feel good about themselves, even if it means telling a lie. They would rather feel good about themselves being lied about who they are than to hear the truth and to do the hard work of following Jesus. Jesus warned his disciples early in his ministry. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. He talked about a narrow road and a broad road. He said, be careful. There's a broad road and it leads to destruction. And there's a narrow road and it leads to life. Now, he didn't say much more about that. He didn't really describe what that meant. He just sort of left that with them. And I'm convinced, church, that many American Christians, if you were to ask them, what's the difference between the narrow road and the broad road, they would probably give you a moralistic kind of answer. Well, the narrow road is that I can't drink and get drunk like everybody else does. The narrow road is that I can't sleep with every girl that I want to like the rest of the world does. The narrow road is that I can't lie, cheat, steal, and stab people in the back to move up the corporate ladder like everybody else does. And as far as that goes, I would agree. I would say, well, all of those answers are right, but I don't even think that you've broken the surface on what it means to be on the narrow road. You see, to be on the narrow road is far more than just being a good, moral person. To be on the narrow road means that we follow Jesus through the underbrush. Sometimes it's so hard that we have to take out a machete and hack it away 1 inch at a time, and nobody makes it through this underbrush without getting cut up. But every wound that we receive is given in love. And there is a goal at the end that is called victory. And this is the only way to get there. The only way to get there. Now, let's write a couple of things down about this conversation. and think it through and ask ourselves, how does this apply in Camden, Arkansas in 2019 to folks who are sitting in the pew at Grace Baptist Church? And the first question that we ask is this: why must they be scattered? Why must they be scattered? And we're asking that question because we're scared that it may be true of us too, and we want to know. If God is a God who scatters, then that may mean that if I follow God, that He will scatter me too. And if God is a God who scatters and He may scatter me, then I want to know why. Why would God strike down my shepherd and scatter me? Maybe He's not the God that I thought He was. Maybe I want to follow this God. Maybe I'd rather follow one of those false gods that makes me feel good about myself. That's a decision that each one of us has to make. So why must they be scattered? There's two answers to that, and here's the first one. They must be scattered to understand how great their need really was. They must be scattered to understand how great their need really was. Peter didn't understand how great his need really was. He still thought he had it all together. He was willing to look Jesus in the face and say, "You're crazy. I got it together. I can handle this." And Jesus said, "No, you can't, Peter. But I'm not going to argue with you about it. You'll find out on your own. When you're done, I'll be there for you. When you're done, I'll be there for you." Now, when Jesus says in verse 32 that He will go before them into Galilee, notice what He said: "When I'm raised up, after I'm raised up, I will go before you into Galilee." The implication there is that they will follow Him, they will be gathered, and that's in fact what happened. Scattered, gathered. Struck down, lifted up. It all goes together. If we're going to follow the struck down, lifted up Jesus, then we are a scattered, gathered people. That's the way this thing works. Okay? So, they needed to know how great their need really was. So, God will put me in situations, and you, that squeeze us so that we find out just how weak we really are. Now, that doesn't sound like church in America. Church in America is about telling you how wonderful you are, how smart you are, how pretty you are, how talented you are, how valuable you are, and making you feel good. When you walk out of that room, you know there's a tear in your eye and a laughter on your lips. And boy, you feel good when you go to lunch. Following Jesus doesn't always feel so good. Following Jesus causes us to look inside our heart honestly and see just how needy we really, really are. One of the reasons, church, that Christianity is struggling in the West generally and in the United States of America specifically is because we live at a time when people think they're pretty good. They're very impressed with themselves. They're just good folks. You know, they don't need a whole lot of help. Just give them a little bit of time and a few more chances, and they're going to work this thing out. And God comes in with a gospel that says, you can't do anything on your own. In fact, if you try to do it on your own, you'll be destroyed. And what you need is some kind of radical solution that will change your heart and your life completely around, pull you inside out, turn you upside down, and make you wonder about everything you've ever been taught since you were a child. And we say, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't come to church for that. And Jesus says, well, if you want to follow me, that's the way it goes. Jesus squeezes us so we feel our need. We understand just how needy we really are. But that's not all. Let's write the second one down. Why must they be scattered? To understand how great their need really was, but also to understand this, to understand how great Jesus' salvation really is. These two things go together, and they come in this order. Until we know how great our need is, we can never appreciate how great Jesus' salvation is. Coming back to our culture, we live at a time when people devalue what Jesus has to offer. People aren't interested in the gospel. You know that. By and large, there are people out there who are, so keep talking to them about it. You'll find them. But a lot of people aren't because they don't see the need. They don't think that what Jesus did on the cross changed the cosmos, or what Jesus did on the cross will change their eternity. They don't understand how great God's salvation is because they've convinced themselves that they're not a needy people. And so the cross has become an appointment. It's become a little thing that we wear around our fingers or necks or whatever. It's not this big, huge, looming wooden thing with splinters in it that's blood-soaked by the precious blood of Jesus, whose shadow covers our entire life and changes it completely. It's just a little tiny thing that you put on occasionally and then throw aside. But that's not what the cross is in the Bible. It's interesting to see how people struggle with the real God and look for something that's easier. Did you notice this week that the Pope Francis of the Roman Catholic Church, decided to officially change the Lord's Supper? Now, some of you may have been aware of this because this is a debate that's been going on for a while. And the Pope Francis has already been in the news months ago, I don't remember how long it was, about this debate regarding the Lord's Prayer. But now, this week apparently, he's made up his mind and he's decided that the translations that we've been reading of the Lord's Prayer are wrong and that he must step in and change them so that they will be right. What's he talking about? Well, you know the Lord's Prayer. There's a phrase in it that says, "Lead us not into temptation." Everybody remember that one? Lead us not into temptation. So here's the argument that's been going on. Would God lead me into temptation? Surely not. He's a kind and patient and loving and tolerant God. And He wants me to feel good about myself and always succeed. He would never want me to stumble and fall. Surely we've misunderstood what Jesus was saying in this model prayer. Let me back up a little bit and make sure we understand something here. We call this the Lord's Prayer, but the Lord's Prayer really we're going to talk about next Sunday. Next Sunday. The Lord's Prayer didn't happen on the Sermon on the Mount. The Lord's Prayer happened in Gethsemane. The prayer that we get in the Sermon on the Mount should be called the model prayer. It's not His prayer, it's ours. Jesus doesn't need to pray that prayer, we do. It may be the Lord's Prayer in the sense that it belongs to Him, but He's giving it to us as a model prayer. So He's not the one praying this prayer necessarily, we are. And He taught us, He said, pray like this. Lead us not into temptation. Now, the Pope is saying, that doesn't sound quite right. So we're going to change it into this. Here's what it's been changed to. Don't let us fall into temptation. Don't let us fall into temptation. So what is he doing here? He's removing the idea that God might actually lead us into temptation. And he's saying that we, as we live our lives, we might occasionally stumble and fall into temptation. And what we're asking God to do now is, don't let me do that. You keep me. You put some boundaries around me, some cushions around me, so that I can never experience any pain in my life whatsoever spiritually. I'm protected. God won't let me fall. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that, first of all, that's not what the prayer says. The prayer says exactly the way it's been translated. It's been translated properly for 1,900 years. And I'll talk to you more about the details and the technical aspects of that to some degree tonight. Not to the point where I'll put you to sleep, but I'll let you ask questions. And there's more to this discussion that I want to share with you, so you come and ask questions and listen tonight. But I wanted to tell you this much this morning. That prayer is interpreted properly, and it has been interpreted and prayed properly for 1,900 years. And Pope Francis is making an error in judgment to change that prayer, and he's misrepresenting God by doing it. When he changes that prayer to don't let us fall into temptation from lead us not into temptation, Job would say, what are you talking about? Because God led me into temptation. Joseph would say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Because God led me into temptation. I could go on, but here's the name that matters more than any of the others. Jesus would say, what are you talking about? Because God led me into temptation. Before I ever started my ministry, the Holy Spirit led didn't allow, led me into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. If we're going to follow Jesus, we will be led into temptation. Why? Why would God do that? Because He is trying to teach us to strengthen up. He doesn't want a bunch of puppets. He doesn't want us living in a room where we're surrounded by boundaries where we can't move. He says, I want you to be wise. I'm going to put you out in the world and teach you how to live where it's tough and where mistakes hurt people. But you're going to get stronger. And at the end of the day, there will be victory. I had to think about my mom this week and things that were said about her when she struggled. Many of you know that she had cancer twice. She beat it the first time and it beat her the second time, so to speak. Now, my mother was a godly woman. And if you don't know me or my mother, then you're probably saying, oh yeah, everybody always says that about their mom. But there are people in here that knew my mom. They know I'm not lying. When my mother had cancer the first time, there were family members of mine said this: if such a godly woman like Barbara Foster, if God would allow such a godly woman like Barbara Foster to go through this kind of struggle, then I don't want to have anything to do with him. Then when she went through cancer the second time, they said the same thing. I can't tell you how enraged I was when I heard that. I also can't tell you how enraged I was when I heard it behind my back and realized that they weren't willing to even say it to my face. But that's the way the devil works. I want to tell you this morning that my mother, like every other believer, faced her temptations. And she was squeezed, and she was scattered, and she refused to let go of Jesus Christ till the minute she breathed her last breath. And I was standing right there with her in the room when she did it. She never recanted. She never renounced. She never returned. She never backed up. And she's in glory right now. And I want to follow Jesus. I don't care how hard it is. Because he's going before us. He's going before us. Would you bow your heads with me? Maybe you're here this morning and you just feel like you're being scattered, squeezed, crushed. And you've probably prayed and asked God, why? Why? Why is this happening to me now? I can't give you the specific answer of why it's happening to you now, but I can tell you this. God hasn't forgotten about you, and nothing happens to you apart from His will. And He's gone ahead of you. And when this trial is over, whatever it is, He'll be there. And you'll sing a song of victory with Him. And so I encourage you, don't let go. Don't give up. If you're here this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus, you've never publicly proclaimed your faith in this struck down and raised up Jesus Christ, I want to give you the chance to do that this morning. We're going to sing a song. We're going to have a time of invitation. If you're ready to become a Christian, to ask for forgiveness and let Jesus be Lord of your life, then just come up here and let me talk to you, would you? Just for a minute or two, let me or one of the people with me pray with you for a moment, and you take that step. Maybe you need to be baptized and just make it public. Go public on Jesus. Come and tell me. And I would love to baptize you. Love to talk to you about that and baptize you. Maybe you're here and you believe that God is leading you to join this church and be a part of Grace Baptist Church. Why don't you come and tell me this morning, and let's make that happen. Whatever God is saying to you, maybe you're here and you're just being squeezed and you need to get on your knees at the altar and do business with God. The altar's going to be open. You do that, okay? He's listening. Father in heaven, thank you so much that you are so strong, so wise, and so loving. We bless you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand and sing. You come. Don't wait.